Hello and welcome to Language of the Soul podcast. I'm your host, Dominic Domingo.
And I'm your co-host, Virginia Grenier.
We'd like to invite you to sit back, relax, and enjoy some inspiring conversation. Here at Language of the Soul, we know that life is story. Individually, we're the products of the stories we tell about ourselves. Culture is the amalgamation of the stories we weave about the human condition. Here's the thing. Individually and collectively, we can write our own story. Thanks for tuning in and joining in the march toward human potential. Born and raised in China, Tong Ge moved to Canada in the late 1980s as an international student, earning a Master's of Science degree from University of Saskatchewan in 1992. Since 2012, she has written under both her real name and the pen name Tong Ge, publishing poetry, prose, and short stories in English and Chinese across North America, England, and Taiwan. Tong is a recipient of 4 literary awards and a finalist for 5 others. Her debut novel, The House Filler, was published in Canada in 2023. It is a finalist for the 2023 Islands Book Awards and the 2024 Canadian Book Club Awards for Fiction, and won the 2024 Independent Press Award for New Fiction, and National Association of Independent Writers and Editors Award for Literary Fiction. Wow, very impressive. Welcome, Tong Ge.
Thank you for having me here.
Of course. Thank you for being here. And welcome, Virginia.
Thank you.
Our producer extraordinaire.
Yes.
Yeah, we're very excited to have you on. Very accomplished and probably one of our most acclaimed authors so far. We've had a lot of authors and a lot of great stimulating conversations, but you seem to be the most, not prolific maybe, because I know this was your debut novel, but certainly most acclaimed. And I want to get to that. I want to really talk mostly about The House Filler. Was there anything in the bio you wanted to correct? I'm sure I butchered something in there.
Oh, now it's 5 literary, 5 awards.
Oh, okay.
I think that one is a bit like old. So
Right. Yeah, I had a feeling, actually, I imagined asking that question, like anything since we received this bio. Well, I guess that is, I was going to start out with our rote question that we ask all of our guests, but how does it feel to have such a great reception critically?
it's great because that's a validation for my ability to write, especially
Absolutely.
when English is my second language.
Right.
I
Right.
face additional challenge.
I agree. And I hate to already jump into some nuanced questions, but do you feel the novel lands differently? Because everything's culturally relative, but language, it's almost like things land differently in different languages. Do you feel that readers have a different experience when reading it in Chinese than they would in English?
Yes, 100%.
How so? I mean, is it more poetic or, that's my guess.
In Chinese, I can use local dialect, so I can regionalize the language spoken.
Mm-hmm.
In English, I can do that.
Right. Right. Yeah, there's all kinds of I do speak French, so I've noticed, it's about cultural values. Like it might take 12 words to say something in French that we have one word for because it's a cultural value. And then vice versa. Eskimos have 20 words for snow because they're surrounded by it all day, every day. We've got one word.
Exactly.
So, did it open up more nuance, more opportunities for you to write it in English, or do you feel you were limited in some way?
I feel I'm limited in some way.
It's really beautiful. I was only able to read about 2.5 chapters so far, but it's poetic simplicity, which is a good thing in my opinion. No idea how it lands in Chinese, but very simple in a beautiful poetic way, if that makes sense.
Thank you.
Just my opinion. Okay, so I'm going to get to the rote question that we talked about, and we like to start out this way just to kind of keep on brand for us, and then we're sort of collecting for a highlights reel the different responses to this question. So as we said a moment ago, it's really beautiful how there's no right answer to this question, but there are recurring themes or outlooks or worldviews that seem to come up. So we just love the different ways in which people express the response to this question. What do you feel has been traditionally the role of storytelling in culture? Without over explaining it, we did say it's culturally relative, of course, and then storytelling is so broad, that's the whole premise of our podcast, that storytelling could apply to cinema, the literary realm, every aspect of life, including propaganda and advertising. So, what do you feel traditionally is the role of story in culture?
I think it's passed down the legacy and the heritage to next generation. Mm-hmm. And also it's about history, because there's one expression I just recently learned from another podcast interview I was listening. This person said, historical fiction humanize history. So that's just such a wonderful description. So it makes history human and more personal and close to us. It's way more interesting than just read a history book. And there's another expression that people share is history is written by victors.
Right,
so,
right.
Official history may not be 100% accurate, especially in countries like China.
Absolutely, yes. So you get to tell the true story behind the propaganda, really.
It's extremely important.
I agree. Yeah, we did have a Harvard literature professor on who specialized in historical fiction. And I think he did talk about a little bit how when you're colonized, especially, a lot of voices get silenced and erased. And it is so important for indigenous peoples to not just keep the tradition alive, but tell those stories of the colonized.
Exactly. And I believe story sharing foster understanding. And because essentially human beings, we're the same. We're human before we're Chinese or Tibetan or American. We're human first. So those, like our psychology, physiology, and emotions are basically the same. We all like to have happiness, health. We long for love, friendship, and we don't want to suffer. But the story told from different culture, fostering that understanding. With understanding, then there's comes to love, compassion, and hopefully that will reduce the conflicts among different groups and among different religions and different country even.
Yes.
I think
one hopes. That's why we're doing it, right? We hope.
Yeah, that's vitally important.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think all creative efforts, art, literature exposes our shared humanity, right? Like you said, we're all just human. But studies have shown that empathy and compassion, which you mentioned, and Virginia has talked about quite a bit, you nurture that for the other. Children that read not commercial fiction so much, but literary fiction, studies show they end up actually having way more empathy and compassion for the other. Cultures they might not have been exposed to otherwise, because they do tap into that shared humanity. Anyway, we're saying the same thing, but thank you. I loved those words. You also, we're kind of jumping ahead here, but you also said in another interview a phrase that I really had never heard it put this way, but fell in love with, that one of the main motivators for storytellers is to right a wrong. Can you expand on that a little bit? That blew my mind, and it's so true.
Actually, I read it from somewhere based on survey conducted, among different writers, and that's number one reason for us to write stories.
It's interesting if it was based on a survey that the authors themselves identified as such, that they were in touch with that. Because it took me a minute. I thought, well, I've never really said that, but I've said it in different words. But when I saw that interview with you, I thought, that is interesting. I would have said traditionally I write to, it sounds condescending, right? But to enlighten people, or maybe just inspire them, get them to look beyond their end of their fucking nose, I say sometimes. Get them, I don't know, just maybe anything but the surface of things. Get them to look at the subtext of life. But when I heard right or wrong, I was like, that is absolutely true. I think some of the injustices in I would have said I do it to cleanse the world. I do it to find my way of moving forward, if that makes sense. The catharsis for me is restoring. And then after I heard your quote, I thought, I am righting a wrong because I'm trying to restore justice in the world as I see it.
Exactly. Especially for us, like Chinese, we have suffered generations and after generations. And what can you do? There's another expression that a pen's mightier than sword, right? Sword.
Say that again. I'm sorry. What's the expression?
A pen is mightier than
yes.
sword. Right?
Yes.
So other than writing and sharing, there's not much you can do. And this is the most peaceful method to fight back, basically.
Well, it might be the only way to persuade. That is one of the premises of my book, which became this podcast, is the didactic realm of persuasion, like rhetoric, as I think you mentioned in one of your interviews. It only goes so far. Whereas when you engage the emotions and all the chemical things that come along with storytelling, you're much more likely to change thought forms and paradigms. So I like what you said about, you're not just documenting history, but you're investing people emotionally, which that is the only thing that changes the paradigms.
Exactly. Yeah.
Beautiful. Well, maybe we'll get into that. I do want to ask you later, do you feel there has been progress, especially in terms of women's issues and maybe societal norms and the empowerment of women, if there has been a change in China? But I also just want to say, what we're talking about here is more crucial now than ever in America, because as you know, fascism is looming on the horizon. So I'm not going to compare our history to China's. You've had a lot more injustices, I'm sure, but right now it's so important that we writers use our voices.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Stay in Canada.
Stay in Canada. I don't have any.
Sorry. Go ahead.
I don't have other plans.
Good. Perfect. Okay. So before we because we're getting to some nuanced stuff that I very much want to pursue, but would you mind for the listeners, because I do think it's always better coming from the author, him or herself, give us a little synopsis of The House Filler, if you would.
Yeah. The House Filler is told through the experience of Golden Phoenix, a woman who faces war, poverty, and political oppression as she fights for survival, freedom, and happiness. The time period covered in the book is from 1920 to 1966. Golden Phoenix was born at a time that a woman's beauty was not measured by her looks, but by the size of her feet. The tinier the feet, the more desirable. So for Chinese parents, they would bend their daughter's feet at age 4 or 5. Golden Phoenix, being a motherless child, her father delayed the process until she was 6. So she ended up with a pair of feet that 1 inch too large, because ideal size was 3 cun in Chinese measurement. So that's about 4 inches long. That's ideal. That would most likely to secure a good marriage.
Right.
But because her feet was 1 inch too long, and she missed her ideal marriage age until she was 26. And so she ended up marrying a widower. So in Chinese culture, in the old time, when women didn't have much rights, a woman who married a widower is called a house filler. So that's where the title of the book comes from. And then after the untimely death of her husband, Golden Phoenix is determined to keep her family together. However, poverty forces her to make the heart-wrenching decisions to give her teenager twins to the Red Army. During the upheaval of the Japanese invasion of her hometown, she is separated from her 2 young girls, and her remaining son leaves to fight with the nationalist army. Golden Phoenix, along with her adopted son, remains to endure the horror and the hardship of war. When the Civil War ended and communists in power in 1949, one of her twins, a member of the Communist Party, is wrongly accused of being a traitor and is sentenced to death. Golden Phoenix and her family must find a way to save her son's life.
Right. Does that happen in the first book, or is that the second book?
First book.
Oh, really? So we get to see the resolution of that effort to save the life of her son.
Yes.
Oh, okay. I thought for some reason that was in the second book. Wasn't there also a son-in-law that was executed by?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, that's a lot, man. That is a lot of
That's what I was
trauma.
thinking.
A lot of- and
like,
I don't.
wow.
Well, Virginia, did she mention the 2 daughters that she gave to the Red Army before? I think you left that out, didn't she? As a way out of poverty, she let 2 of her sons join the Red Army, right?
Yes, twin sons. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
That makes sense, yeah.
Yeah, that's a lot of trauma, potential trauma there, right? Intergenerational trauma. The first thing I want to say is, I've always heard about the feet binding and was aware of it, but until reading your synopsis and part of the book, never had I Googled it. It is horrific to look at.
Oh, you did?
Oh yeah, well, pictures of actual bound feet. It's horrific.
I have a reader told me she regretted that she Googled it. She
Right.
wished.
Well, you can't unsee it. You can't unsee that.
I've never. I didn't Google it because I remembered when I was a preteen, and it's actually there at the Hollywood Ripley's Believe It or Not, Dominic. But my dad and I went there, and there's a section that has the shoes and images of that time frame when the feet.
Did you know before seeing that the toes literally fold under, and I just didn't know they would dislocate and break the toes. I had no idea.
I had no idea until I went to Ripley's and it was in there, and I was like, "Oh my goodness."
To me, though, tell me if clearly this crossed your mind. I'm sure it's so emblematic of all the ways in which women are, I don't know, imprisoned by these social constructs and patriarchy. Frankly, it's just the perfect symbol of the way we cripple women.
Exactly. Not only physically, but in China, way back when, girls are not valued as much as boys, and most families don't think girls deserve education. So they deny their education. So this is a vicious circle, because when girls don't have enough education, they cannot make a living. When they couldn't make a living, then they have to rely on man. When they have to rely on man, they have to do things to please the man. So include feet bending and foot bending, and that further disable them, especially when the war happens. People need to run, from bombing. Imagine with like a bound feet. That's extremely hard for women. Extremely. So they're deprived physically and emotionally and mentally and in all aspects.
Well, in Western European Judeo-Christian culture, we've always joked like, well, high heels are meant to put women ill-adept, make women ill-adept, but it's under the guise of beauty, right?
Exactly.
But it's seen as a little bit of a conspiracy theory. This is very clear to me. It's under the guise of beauty, but actually it makes them second-class citizens because they're literally, disabled. So
not only high heels is a light form of that, social expectation. We're talking about, plexus surgery, breast implementation, all that stuff.
Well, since we're into this territory, I really loved hearing what you said about the ways in which your grandmother, and it sounded like other people in the village, would try to empower the next generation of women by, can you tell that story of planting the stool outside the window at school, or even leaving your backpack at a friend's house? Do you remember that?
Yes.
They slyly gave their daughters more tools than they had.
Yeah, the story is based on my grandmother's real life story. So she was, her father hired private tutors for her brothers, but she was not allowed to enter the classroom. So this is real, like happened in real life. She would, when father went out to work, she would carry a stool and place under the window outside of the classroom and try to listening into the class. Later, when she had 2 girls, her husband, being traditional and old-fashioned, wouldn't want the girls to go to public school, and then she registered them behind his back, and they managed to hide that until he passed away, like for the first few years of their girl's life.
Mhm.
But she realized how important education was to girls, and she put her feet down, and she was going to do something defy the social norm.
Hmm.
Yeah,
So she sent them to school
she sent them to school.
while
Yeah,
the husband was away at work. But then didn't you say something like they would leave their backpacks at a friend's house, and just the mother would say, "Oh, they were out playing."
yeah,
It's
exactly.
I just think it's really beautiful that she saw we can make a difference generationally, you know?
Yeah.
So I guess that leads to my question I hinted at a moment ago. Do you feel there has been progress? I think here in the States, we just assume communism is, we have a knee jerk reaction to communism. And there's a lot of myths, so I just wonder if you feel there has been progress in terms of
Yes.
empowerment for women.
Yes. Actually, starting in 2012, the imperial system in China was overthrown. So China became a Republic of China, and
Mhm.
the Republicans in China abolished the food banding. So
Mhm.
even though it was abolished, but people still do that,
I
especially in
think you
the
said the latest case was in the 50s, was it?
yeah.
Documented case? Okay.
Yeah, latest in the remote village in China, because it's too remote and the villagers didn't know the outside world has changed.
Right, right.
Yeah,
Well, I guess that's what I was thinking too when you said, you know, that it became a republic. I thought, yeah, but norms are a little slower to change, right? It doesn't matter
yeah,
who the regime is. Norms and mores and, social constructs are kind of slow to change.
yeah. And also it depends on, like, with elite families, they embrace change earlier on, right?
Because of
Just
education or why?
education, view, like uh they would go to other countries, send their children to
Mhm.
abroad to study.
Yeah,
So
more
that's broaden.
exposure. Mhm.
Exactly. Yeah. And the remote villagers, the people who didn't have education, will change very slow.
Well, I
It's
think
like that.
that's true everywhere, isn't it, Virginia? Right?
Yeah,
That's where the most conservative folk are here, or in the not the
yeah,
urban areas, but the
yeah. I would say when you get more out into the rural areas, you definitely see people hold on to their way of life
mm,
more steadfastly, and it's because they also see it as a way of survival. Because I see that here. I'm in the state of Utah. I'm originally from California, and there's definitely a difference between the more like Salt Lake City, where I'm at, in St. George. That's a little bit more city-ish. I just don't consider them quite a city in my brain, just
it's
because I'm from LA, but that's just because of that.
all relative, isn't it?
Yeah, it's all relative. Like Salt Lake, yes. St. George, not so much.
Right.
But yeah, I mean they're definitely more, not so much metropolitan, but definitely more city-ish in their way. But you get out to like I have a step brother. So I have a brother-in-law who's from Delta, which you guys are both like I hardly even know Utah. Like, what the heck? Yeah, there's a place called Delta. There's actually a place called Holiday that's even worse than Delta, I guess. And how rural it is, like very small population of people. And I get it. Like, they're living off literally, I mean, their livelihood is being mostly ranchers, farmers, living off the land. That is how they sustain their family. That is how they make money. That is how they survive. And so to try and modernize and
Mhm.
get, and I mean, that's just here in the US. So I couldn't even imagine
Mhm.
in other countries what that's like, where there's the cultural differences from our way of life as well, when you get into those rural areas.
Yeah, it's logical, right? I mean, sorry, Tong, we'll get back on track in a minute, but I think it's logical to a degree. I have, we've seen it all, right? When you have elites saying, let's save the spotted owl in the American Northwest, but then there's loggers whose livelihoods have depended on it for generations, you can't just with the swipe of a pen take away their livelihood. So it just makes sense. Farmers, like you said, they're clinging to their way of life because it's all they know. And then sometimes the more cultured, educated elites come in and just want progress to happen overnight, but they're not working with the system. Anyway, I'm so sorry for that. But I do,
Oh, that's wonderful.
well, it's related, I hope.
Yeah.
But I want to ask you because we're getting into some good stuff here, but maybe backtrack a little bit. And maybe what inspired you to tell, firstly, your grandmother's story? What inspired it in the first place? And then what was the process of researching not just history, but your family history?
My mother was a storyteller. So ever since I was a child, she has been telling me her family side of story.
Mm,
So I was familiar with those stories growing up. I met my grandmother once before she
mm,
passed away.
mm,
But as I said, I think writing story is a way to right the wrong. When I was in junior high, I wanted to be a writer, but my life didn't. My path took
mhm.
a long detour until now. Yeah, so it's just that the story is too fascinating. If I just tell somebody verbally about my family story, they will say,
Mm,
"Hey, that's a book. There's
mm.
just enough drama there. You really should write it." But I am also influenced by my father from a young age, so I fell in love with storytelling.
What does he do, or what's his background?
He was a scientist and a professor,
Mhm,
but he had deep knowledge of Chinese literature and
mm,
history. And when I
mhm,
was a child, he has been telling me those stories in history.
mhm.
Um, During the Cultural Revolution, I don't know if you're familiar with that, between 1966 and 1976 in China.
I'll be
And
honest. You've made me do some research here. I'm blissfully ignorant to much of Chinese history, but I got a little confused because everything coincided with World War II, right? It's like they put things on hold. The revolution, right, was put on hold for World War II, and then it got all kind of conflated, didn't it?
oh, that was before 1949. Now we're talking about after 1949 that communists took over power.
Oh, was that after? Okay.
Yeah,
I
and
know very little only because my husband's a huge history buff, and so he really loves reading other countries' history going outside the US, like finding stuff that's been translated into English from other countries. And um hearing that your father was a professor, I was like, oh my gosh, because I know a lot of scientists and people who were into the arts during that time had to be mindful too.
Well, I knew that it was basically a communist revolution, right? And then you had the nationalists, but I thought that was the conclusion of World War II. So a lot of the developments took place after World War II, in other words, in the
yeah,
50s.
after the Second Sino-Japanese War, then
Mm,
China had 3 years of civil war.
right.
And at the end of that, communists took over power in 1949. So they call it liberation. So we were liberated in 1949,
In
Mhm.
quotes, right?
in quotes, yeah. And so during the Cultural Revolution, the whole country was a chaos. They targeted the intellectuals. At the beginning targeted politicians, like government officials. There's no justice system. There's no police. There's no law and order. Anybody can beat anybody to death.
Wow.
Mhm.
So my father was locked up.
Mm,
In It's not even a formal arrest or prison. There's like a makeshift lockup place, almost like a concentration camp. They're
mm,
called
Mhm.
call shed. So he was locked up for uh, I think about 2 years.
mhm.
Then he was released in 1970 or end of 1969. But his job was suspended. He still have to join the political meetings every evening. But we
Mhm.
had a power outage 2 or 3 times a week.
Ah, yeah.
So
I
when that
remember this
happened,
story. Yeah, this is good.
yeah, then he stayed home, and then we would cover up our windows and lighted a single candle, and he would take out this book. It's a collection of fantasy, like short stories of fantasy. It's called The Strange Tales from a Chinese Studio. It was written
Hmm.
by a guy in Qing Dynasty. Like this guy spent 40 years of his entire life to write
So
this.
is it ancient Chinese, in other words, as opposed to
It's
modern?
classic Chinese.
Classic.
It's not modern. It's classic. Yeah.
Hmm.
But like a generation like my father, they understood, right?
Mm-hmm.
Then he would translate into modern language and told the stories in this nights to my mother and myself. And that's when I began to fall in love with storytelling.
It's a beautiful image just around a single candle.
The book was banned. If we were found, we'll be in big trouble.
Wow.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna ask. That was because I want to say during that time there was certain literature that was only allowed as, so you had to be really careful. So I think that's amazing that your father still wanted to instill that in you guys growing up. So you.
But that is the power of storytelling, isn't it? That it survives despite.
Mm-hmm.
A friend of mine was a curator at the Skirball, and I went to a marriage contract exhibit of, Jewish marriage contracts throughout the ages. And it was kind of the first time I realized, wow, it's kind of a small miracle that the traditions survived under really harsh circumstances globally. And it is because of people with a single candle in an attic preserving some kind of legacy, whether it's the literature, right, or a faith. So I think that's the beautiful part of storytelling, frankly, is that's how it survives. That's how we're going to survive this fascist dictatorship is,
well, and I
is
think
the storytelling. I'm sorry. It's always that way.
Well, the thing I think that goes right to what Tong Ge has been sharing too, when you talked about the survey and how it's writings about is righting the wrong.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's why people are so scared sometimes of writers and books.
They're powerful.
It's very powerful.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's why intellectuals were targeted. Like every single time in Chinese history, when there's a political upheaval or turbulence, campaigns after 1949, in every political campaign, intellectuals were the targets.
Yeah, well, look at Hitler. I'm going to say it. Of course, Hitler was not just a frustrated artist, but there's a reason they censored all creatives. And a more recent, ISIS. What do they do? The first thing they do is take sledgehammers to the sculptures. Mm-hmm. So you destroy, right? History's written by the winners. So every regime tries to rewrite history and, frankly, erase and silence the legacy. Anyway, so that your father's practice of telling stories to you, and you said your mother was a born storyteller, so you were getting oral histories from her. What was the precise moment where you decided to put pen to paper and tell this story?
2004.
Mm-hmm.
That's 20 years ago.
I needed the hour and the minute.
Oh. I was on disability leave. Actually, I was disabled at work from the injury. Right, I have repetitive strain injuries on my both arms because of too much computer work. So I was on disability leave in 2002. By 2004, my disability leave ended, but I couldn't return to work because my injury is permanent.
Did you have the carpal tunnel surgery?
It's not carpal tunnel. My condition
repetitive
is
motion. Okay.
Yeah, it's worse than carpal tunnel.
Okay.
So, sorry.
Go ahead.
One day I was in the garden, gardening, and an inspiration just came, and I decided to start because I before that I didn't know which angle I should use. Until that moment. So I decided to write a series of letters, like one sister in Canada write these letters to other sister in China. And I started in Chinese. But after 17 letters, I couldn't continue because of my hands. I couldn't handle the computer work. And also because I realized that if I write in Chinese, I don't have any resource, any support here. Right? I couldn't find beta readers or join critique group. Freelance editors, even publishers is just out of my reach. So then I stopped until 2006 and restarted. Actually, I started with taking creative writing courses and then restarted in English, write it in English. That's a long journey, but in terms of research, you were asking earlier, I, like my mother's story is really helpful, but I also realized that I need to interview my other relatives and to either conform or not conform her version of the story or provide additional information. And during these interviews, I discovered more stuff from our family history. That was 2015. I went back to China and did that. Then for the
sorry to interrupt you. Did you record them audio or just listen and then write later? Okay.
Yeah, just talk. Yeah, and but I have done lots of research on internet. Internet is a great thing. Without internet, I think it takes much longer. About important historical events, right? I need to be accurate. For important historical figures and events, I need to be accurate. And I did tons of research of that. And I think it's so impressive about this internet because I was able to purchase the newspapers published at the time.
Wow.
From my
physical copies of them?
Copies, now
digital.
Like photocopies, yeah.
Okay, yeah.
Digital copies. Online from
Amazing.
my grandmother's hometown during the time I was writing.
It's beautiful that they archive them. Like before the interwebs, we used to have, you would go to the library, they had them on microfiche. So if you knew how to do it, you could get anything that was recorded on microfiche. But thank God for the internet. I get down on it sometimes, but that is like one of the pluses, right?
You have to know this is during the war in the 1930s and 40s.
Amazing.
It's amazing. It's totally amazing. Yeah. So I got lots of stuff from there, and some parts. Even though I say 90% of the material are based on my grandmother's story, but there's 10%. I got it from research. Even some part directly quoted from newspaper. Right.
Well, real quick, back to family, did you get any conflicting reports, anything that conflicted with your grandmother's oral histories? I mean, everybody sees things differently, so that's one of the things I wonder about, if different family members are invested in one version of a story and others might be invested in another. Any conflicting stuff and any surprises?
I would say just additional information and the surprises. Because by talking with my cousin, I finally realized that my grandmother was raped by the Japanese soldiers. My mother, I don't think my grandmother ever told my mother that. And she told my cousin just one version, but we believe it's more. She didn't tell. Wow. Like a gun rape. She never told that, but we suspect.
Did it explain anything to you to learn that? I don't know if that makes sense.
He did. My cousin.
No, but did it explain anything about your grandmother to know that? Those are life-changing events.
Yeah. Well, sorry, I didn't quite get your question.
I don't know. I think when we learn what made our parents who they are or made our grandparents who they are, it kind of explains who they became,
Yeah. Yeah, I have that revolution. Yes, they explains who she was, and that enriched my writing.
Yes.
Another big surprise is her romantic relationship with this young guy.
Well, tell us more, please.
Yeah, I'm like, because that's not a very common thing for that generation in general.
You want my okay? I'll tell you the fictionalized story, but the real life is really, really close. This a teenager boy, wandered into Kaifeng, where that was my grandma's hometown, and then after her husband passed away, all her boys joined the army, and she just adopted this young guy son, right? So she was 27 years older than this boy, and when the boy became a man, they had a romantic relationship, but that was a taboo because in China, at the time, a man can marry more than one woman, and a man is 20, 30, 40 years older is not normal. But a woman, an older woman involved with a younger man, that was a scandal. So they never publicly admitted that. It's like a secret love.
Right.
And but I actually, I would say I've discovered this actually from my mother, not from my cousins or aunts and uncles. In a different way. Like my mother said something like my aunt told her, because my aunt was living with my grandma during the Japanese occupation. So my aunt told my mother, do you know our mother is involved with so and so, because they all live in the same complex. And when my mother told me, my mother said, how could your aunt be so like basically blame my aunt for tarnish my grandmother's reputation.
Right.
Like,
well, that's kind of what I was hinting at earlier. You have family members that want to kind of preserve the. Sometimes we want to protect families and tell the same story over and over again, but it's not the full story.
Yes, but this young man, right? They spent all their life together, and he never married. He refused to get married, and insisted to be not like at my grandmother's side. So he has been calling my grandmother aunt, but they're not really related by blood.
That's very romantic, isn't it?
Yeah,
because the stakes are so high. It's forbidden love, but the stakes are so high.
Yeah, but when I was writing this story, I hired a manuscript evaluator. Actually, I did this twice. Once I hired an American guy, and that was like pretty good. His suggestions was very constructive. Second time, it was a blind match. I know I would never do that. Blind match means you submit your work to this organization. They will match somebody with you, but you don't know who. You don't know who is this person.
Yeah.
And after she read that part, she was really, really harsh on me. She said, you will insult your publisher, your readers, everyone. How could you write something like that?
What? That's not her job.
Yeah, I'm kind of surprised by that too.
That's not her job. I thought you were going to say she said that's not believable because life is stranger than fiction, right?
Yeah, she said you're insulting everyone by including this part.
Well, that's a logical concern. I think anybody that tells truth, the good, the bad, and the ugly in their writing runs that risk. So it does lead me to a question. Why did you choose to fictionalize it opposed to just calling it strict biography or even narrative nonfiction?
Because first of all, I don't know what I heard is 100% accurate. Second, I don't know how to write a nonfiction with all the details being accurate. I don't know what is a line. Right. So if I write a fiction, then I have more freedom.
Exactly. Yeah.
Especially, for story to work, I need to consolidate some characters because things happen to different people. If you just write as it is, it's not a good story.
Yeah, I think it's tricky too because when you start using dialogue, who really remembers the precise words that were used? But then when you apply artistic license, you can create full conversations and it's not as crucial, if that makes sense.
Exactly.
A lot more
and
freedom.
There's certain gaps in the story. I have to feel it.
Exactly.
So I need that freedom, creative freedom.
Well, I also like that you mentioned that, in life, there's multiple characters in our lives, individuals that we interact with, and trying to put, think about just, as individual people, daily that don't have a phenomenal story and, where it's all flashy to put into a nonfiction storyline. If you just try to write your normal biography or autobiography anyhow, people would get lost because you're like, well, wait, who's this? Like I have a Justin and a Dustin and an Austin all in my life. And those three names are just similar. So trying to distinguish who those three people were, it'd just be easier just to make them all one person.
Exactly. And also about emotion, right? Because emotion is a big part of storytelling. So for nonfiction, it's pretty hard. How do I know that person's emotion after a catastrophic event? How do I know what does that person think or feel or
Yeah, I call it upping the stakes. If you're going to tell a story, you know how to reach people in the mind, the heart, and the gut. And so if you can heighten the emotions by telescoping or I that's why I write in an omniscient voice, because then I can get inside everybody's head, right?
Yeah.
But if you're just doing strict biography, it's all speculation. You don't know what that person was thinking or that character was thinking. So I think you did the right thing, fictionalizing it.
Yeah. For sure.
Well, I have a written down question. I'm going to just read it. There is a sentiment that we must remember the horrors of history lest they repeat themselves. Historical fiction often documents those horrors in a narrative format, making it very immediate for the reader. Actually, that's what we were just talking about, making it emotionally, not just preachy or didactic, but making it emotional. So, what role did documentation play for you? And did you have a desired outcome in mind? I guess the real question I'm getting to is, just with the synopsis you've shared and the little bit of reading I was able to do, it's easy to assume that this is a story about resilience. It clearly is, and overcoming, maybe persistence. But I think there's probably more there. Did you have an intention thematically, or did something evolve organically that you didn't expect in terms of, I'm not going to say the message, but the themes that evolved?
That's a good question. Let me think.
It's empowerment is another word that came to mind. It's resilience. The phoenix, I mean, it's right there, right?
Yeah,
Overcoming and persisting. But it seemed to also be about whatever I just said. Empowerment, obviously female empowerment. She took her power back at some point, seemingly.
Yeah, definitely. She fought back.
Yeah, but it kind of, and don't take this the wrong way, but it reminded me a little bit of, I mean, obviously Mulan was about empowerment, but Gone with the Wind, when you put it in a historical context or backdrop, you get to see how one builds character from these trials and tribulations. So to me, Gone with the Wind was largely about, yeah, resilience, yeah, persistence, but actually the character that one builds through trials. So, yeah, if you could just talk to the main themes, and I know love was one of them. Maybe you could talk about the theme of love. It was her bond with her children that drove her. What role did love play?
Well, love kept her
It's everything.
alive. It's everything.
Yes.
Yeah, her love for her children, her love for her husband, her love for her family, and also her love for her lover. That's kept her alive, and this is about resilient, about survival. It's about also about, as you said, empowerment, and that is not come from a speech or what do you call that?
Like persuasion.
Pep talk.
Yeah, right.
It's from the horrible life experience. So either something kill you or make you stronger, right? So when she was not killed, she decided to fight back. And that's from the middle of the book, a second half. But this is not a typical a Hollywood happy ending story. It's not. It takes 3 generations to really finally reach the land of freedom. So that's why there's 3 books in this series. And this book is based on the first generation. Then the next 2 books are based on next 2 generations. It really takes 3 generations of struggle and to reach that.
Right. Well, I don't want to get too technical, but we talk about intergenerational trauma on this podcast a lot. And I just call it the baggage of your parents, right? There's always unfinished business or baggage. Sometimes it's not even examined. We're not even aware of it. Surely that theme came up. I mean, I happen to love Wuthering Heights because it shows from one generation to the next how we carry on, even in our cellular memory in our bodies, Scarlet Letter was about that, how only by showing multiple generations can you see how this stuff is passed on, and either you have a cycle breaker who deals with it or it just gets perpetuated. So did any of that come to mind while writing it, like how the trauma that your grandmother experienced then affected subsequent generations?
I think make us stronger, like tougher,
Hmm.
because that's the only way to survive. There's no any other way, and I think that's written in our DNA. Not only
Hmm.
our family, but I think maybe a whole generation.
Yeah,
Um,
Virginia, you've talked about resilience being
Hmm.
an epigenetic outcome, right?
Yeah, there's actually been research studies that there is what's called, they refer to it as the resilient gene. And not everybody who has trauma in their life has it, but it does crop up. So the ones who, if you have two people who experience a lot of, traumatic experiences in their lives, they have found the ones who tend to be more resilient tend to work through it. And I'm not saying not that everybody doesn't need therapy in those situations. Obviously, it benefits everybody, but if they don't have it, they just innately, because of that resilient gene, and so they see that with families who have generational trauma, that gene tends to show up in the
Hmm.
DNA line.
Right. Well, anyway. Yeah, the nature versus nurture thing, right?
Mhm.
If the methyl groups that are going to express the gene are only a product of your thoughts and feelings and your environment, right? And so sometimes when we hear the horrors of history from our grandparents, it perpetuates a disempowering narrative, if that makes sense. But I think one of the outcomes has to be, and tell me what feedback you're getting, whether it's from reviews or just anecdotally from readers. I think it would put things in perspective for sure. And I'd go, wow, my problems are pretty small by comparison, or at least if she can do it, I can do it. You know?
yeah, feedback I got from readers, they love it. They can't put it down. They are waiting for my next book. And about the gene or genetic resilient, I think if something that horrible happened to a person or to a family or to a generation, I wouldn't say to a generation, to a person, it either break you or made you stronger. There's no any
Hmm.
other way.
Hmm.
So as you said, yeah, not everyone comes out stronger, but in my story, yes, she comes out stronger, and so as the next two generations.
Yep. Yeah, but
Uh,
that's inspiring to people, I'm sure, Again, it does put our problems in perspective, but I also feel like it's inspiring because you see, despite great odds, a character can overcome, you know?
exactly. Yeah. What she has experienced, what her generation has experienced, is so much worse than what we have experienced.
Yep.
So when you put everything in perspective, it's your obstacles, your problems, your sufferings is seems like a handleable, like it's you can overcome it, you can survive.
Well,
That's place, yeah,
I would say she becomes a hero to those after her because we're able to look back and go, this individual was able to go through all of this and still survive it all.
yeah,
So, what does that say about me? And I think that helps us go very introspective on where our strengths are and where our weaknesses are, and how, finding that resilience within ourselves. Even if we have to
yeah.
like lean on someone like, the Phoenix here, and be like, I'm going to lean on this person because they did it. So if they can do it, I can do it, and pull that string.
Mm.
Not only that, I don't. I wish what I'm going to say next won't make you guys think I'm crazy or weird. Or I have been in touch with my grandmother in the last 20 years
Mm.
through mediums, and she knew I wrote this book. She was mightily proud of me. But there's one time I was in a critique group, and we have we have an open door policy. So whoever want to drop in, they're welcome. So that when I was writing this book in that critique session, I was sharing short like a story, an essay about my experience when I was young. I was sexually assaulted,
Mhm.
and it was extremely hard for me to share that. That day, there's a drop in person. She was never a part of that group before and never since,
Mm.
but she just
Wow.
dropped in that day. She was once Miss Calgary, very beautiful woman.
Mm.
In her, I think she was 30 or 31, And so she joined our critique group. And after the session, because I was sharing my story, then after the session, she said, I'd like to go out with you for coffee. That was like 9:30 p.m. I was thinking like, what's going on? She said, I really like to have coffee with you, like just a short one. Is that okay? I said, okay, sure. So we went to next door, the restaurant next door. And when we sat down, she told me, she said, I have psychic power. I'm not a medium, but I have psychic power. She said, while you were sharing your stories, there's an old Chinese lady stood behind you.
Mhm.
And her hands were on your shoulders.
Wow.
And she said that she want me to tell you, she has experienced way worse than what you have experienced. So it basically try to say that it's if you put everything in perspective, you can overcome this.
Mhm.
It's really happened. And after that, I never see this lady again.
That's amazing.
I love
Yeah.
that. And I believe things like that happen. I know Dominic has stories that are right along those lines. I've had them too. And I believe that even when our loved ones pass on, that I believe we can pull from that strength, and that they do come and put that strength, pour their strength into us so we can get through those times. So that's just beautiful.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
Well, there's also this idea of spiritual contracts, right? You have agreements with people and they enter your lives, right? It might just be for 30 seconds, but sometimes you get what's needed, if that makes sense, in your journey. And I've had some ominous things happen.
Oh, wow.
Well, like the power of suggestion. I've had some predictions made, and then it's just the law of attraction. It just actually comes to pass. But yeah, spiritual contracts, agreements, and we're not going to figure out all the mysteries of the universe, right? But I think we're going to figure it out on a quantum mechanics level at some point. What's going on there with all those little consciousness particles?
Yeah, your story sounds fascinating too.
Oh, the one I just hinted at?
Yeah.
No, it was haunting. I rarely. God, I don't want to say it.
Okay.
No, I mean, it was so weird. It was just at a Starbucks, same thing, just at a Starbucks, complete stranger. And she said, we have had 2 evidential psychics on this podcast, by the way.
Oh.
And they say they understand there's a lot of responsibility. So you don't issue unsolicited, do you know what I mean? Like predictions or advice.
Okay.
It's kind of like, they say unsolicited advice is always criticism, but they just are aware of the responsibility. And this woman was not. And she said, you have to know, big things happen to people after they meet me. And of course, I go, good things, right? Like I'm going to win the lottery, right? I was kidding. I just said good things, right? And she goes, just big things.
Oh.
So that was haunting to me, and I walked away with a little negative feeling, and I never saw her again, and that's when I ended up in the hospital for 18 days, Virginia.
Oh, no.
Story.
Yes.
Yeah, everything's changed. So my whole world has changed as a result of this brush with death. But she energetically saw something on the horizon, and she was not wrong. But then, we all connect dots. Our little psyches like to connect dots. So who knows, but those are the facts, ma'am.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so you're not freaking us out at all. We're
No, you're among kindred spirits when it comes to that one. I've actually, so I've never shared this on the podcast, but I'll share just because it opened the door a little bit to this, and I won't take us too far out in the weeds. But I've had experiences where I have literally been in situations where I wasn't sure how I was going to get out of them, and I have seen family members who have passed. Literally visibly in front of me, help give me, just either by seeing them, like a feeling will overcome me, or like I barely hear like something being whispered, and then like I do the double take, like did that just happen kind of thing, and then inspirations, has hit to help make me go down a different path that was a way better path than the one I could have taken. So yeah.
Wow.
Well, that actually leads to hopefully a legitimate question. Isn't there? So I pray to my mom. I feel like, there's still a connection there. Absolutely. But I sometimes find myself just, hey, mom, come visit tonight in my dream. It's been a while, come visit. But then I'm like, am I praying to God or my mom? But I think in many cultures, there's the idea that you do have spirit guides. And in Chinese culture, isn't it true specifically your ancestors are watching over you, or that you're meant to commune with them in some way?
Well, before 1949, China was a Buddhist country, right?
Right.
So Buddhists believe in reincarnation.
Mm-hmm.
And now, I don't know. Some people believe, some people don't. It's just very mixed. But I do same thing as you. Sometimes I don't know if I pray to God or pray to
Right, to your
my
ancestors.
dead relatives. So sometimes I just call them out. I pray to God first, and then, hey, by the way, if you guys want to help.
Right. Yeah. No,
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of, new age philosophy. You would say you have spirit guides and angels, and I don't get into all that terminology, but I do. I like the idea because it is related to your book. You are keeping your grandmother alive, not just her stories and not just her legacy, but in a way, do you know what I mean? Her consciousness, her energy is persisting, and you're an agent in that.
Yeah, and my father is there too. And one thing is my lifetime regret, because Chinese culture, we're talking about our generation, we don't say I love you, between family members, between people, we don't hug each other. And I, after my father passed away, I realized I have never really said I love you. So I've been saying it so many times now, like when I talk to him. One time I think I went to a medium, and she told me, she said, "Oh, your father said he didn't say that either." So
Something you put in the book. Oh, I love you. Okay, got it.
yeah, I love you. Yeah, but he's kind of say like, don't be too guilty about it, because I have never said that to you either.
Right. Yeah, that's a shame, but it's never too late, right? You're doing it now. So
Yeah. And also what else? Something I want to say. In one of my dreams, sometimes those dreams. Sometimes it's not a dream. It's not a dream. It's you have a connection with the other world. And in that dream, I vividly remember my father said, me because I have a sister too, right? But I'm the most smart, hardworking, gifted, talented person. But then my father said, how come she suffered so much? It's not fair. That's what he said.
Wow. Well, I think I heard you say something in another interview. Oh no, this was a conversation at Starbucks. Never mind. With two of my friends yesterday. We do, and Virginia, you might relate to this because actually he was in a program to become certified as a family counselor.
Okay.
Similar to your program, I think. But anyway, he said, we're really apt to blame ourselves. Like in molestation cases, it's pretty universal. The kid blames himself, or even divorces. If your parents divorce, the kid tends to blame themselves. He was juxtaposing that with this idea we want to believe there's justice in the universe. And I know that I want to go to bed at night thinking, people are good and the world is benevolent, the universe is benevolent, and there is justice. So when you say that person was kind and good and, do you know what I mean, a good citizen, and they did all the right things, they didn't deserve that deck of that deck of cards, that, what do you call it, hand of cards, or that experience, they didn't deserve that. That doesn't sit well with our desire to rationalize the universe, if that makes sense. That's why children blame themselves. So does any of that make sense? Like, I think sometimes bad things do happen to good people, and that's a hard thing for us to wrap their brains around.
Yeah. Buddhism believe that if that happens, it's like your previous life or your previous life, you did something wrong.
Yeah.
I found that's really hard to accept.
I think it's problematic through a modern lens. It's probably pretty problematic because it's the victim blaming we talk about on this show a lot, right? The red dress syndrome, the victim blaming, and I think it's a little outdated. No, just my opinion. I like a lot of course, a lot of the Eastern philosophy behind Buddhism, and to a lesser degree Hinduism, a slightly lesser degree, but I think there are problematic tropes there with regard to the hierarchy that is karma, you know?
Yeah.
The class, it's almost like a caste system. Well, it is a caste system, but we might have evolved out of that. Anyone?
I was thinking, well, technically we have that in the Christianity realm when you think
Yeah.
about, the father's sins being on the child, which is why we do baptisms,
Yeah,
to
we need
kids.
to retire. Like, you don't need an ambassador to be to redeem yourself. You know, you don't need the golden ticket. We have the power within, right, to redeem ourselves. Anyway.
Yeah, I think Christianity explains why bad things happen to good people is because of free will, right?
Yeah,
That's how they explain it, free will.
Yeah, but they do believe that when you're born in sin because of the sin of the father, which is like in Catholicism, they baptize infants. I know some other Christian faiths they do that. The LDS Church, which is primarily out here in Utah, I mean they're everywhere, but Utah is known as their hub. It's 8 years old because now you know the difference between right and wrong. So you get baptized then, so you recognize what sin is. But
well, I think. Sorry, I'm jumping in just because I want to relate it to the podcast. I think this is all good stuff. It's all storytelling, you know, the stories we tell ourselves culturally, and that includes religion, because God knows it's taken over. Christianity just bam really took off, didn't it? And took over much of the Western European Judeo-Christian world anyway. And I think the pendulum swings, and it has to do with the power structures. Because if you look at what you just described, we're all faulted, we're born with original sin, we have to be redeemed through Christ. That's kind of a horrible, it's a pretty self-loathing way to look at humanity. But man, they really cemented it during the Dark Ages. Then you had the Renaissance, where, right, humanists, like, we're not faulted. We're glorious creatures with immense capacity and potential. And so whenever fascism takes over, suddenly we're faulted again. Like, just look at Make America Great Again. Well, what if it was okay to begin with? You know, like, we're not all. So it's the divide and conquer thing, and seeing us as faulted is not empowering, period. So I'm just offering that if you look at history, it's kind of a pendulum swing towards believing we have the goods within, you know, and believing you need something outside of yourself to save you.
Yeah. Well, and that's why I think it's so great about Tong Ge's, story too, because you're sharing basically how, through your grandmother's story, Chinese culture, how it's gone through some very similar, storylines, and that which is really what brings it all back to, which is what our podcast is about, is that interconnectivity, how we're all humans first, everything else is after.
Yeah.
But it's also, it's about empowerment too, because despite all the forces that were out to squelch her humanity, right, and disempower her, she found the goods, like we're saying, the power within to do that. So I'm going to read the whole book and then I'll say more. Go ahead.
Thank you. And also, human beings are the only species we have something called a conscience. Animals don't have that. That makes us special.
I love it.
I love that too.
Well, we might steer toward a close soon, but I have one more question that I would love to run by you. And we kind of hinted at it earlier. Virginia and I are obviously fascinated with language. It's right there in the title of our podcast. And it's not just stories that transform, but it's come up quite a bit on this podcast. Language has the capacity to reveal profound truths in a way, I guess images can do it too, but in a way that bypasses cognition. And I think Anya Ochtenberg was the one that said it takes you into these dark corners or alleys. So simple word juxtaposition can suggest something conceptually that's nonlinear, if that makes sense. So I'm not reading the question at this point, but it was something to do with, I already asked you if you feel your book lands different because it's culturally relative in one language versus another. But I wonder if there's more to say on that. What about language itself? How did you use the tool of language itself to best tell your story?
Put it this way, I like Hemingway's style, like simple, not overly complicated and overly flourish. And
I was going to say flowery. Yes, it was not
flowering,
flowery.
yeah. And I'm not capable of doing that anyway, but I know I can write way better in Chinese than in English because Chinese is my first language.
Mm-hmm.
And because, as you said, the cultural relevance. And I think to know another language, like for example, for me, to know Chinese is a double-edged sword. It's both a blessing and a curse for me to write in English. So
Mm-hmm.
blessing is that I can use, Chinese expressions, Chinese pre-verbs, Chinese cliche even. If I use a Chinese cliche, nobody knows it's a cliche, right? Say,
Right,
oh, that
right,
sounds so wonderful.
right.
But Chinese grammar is like a language so much different from English. And it's really hard for me to write correctly, consistently in English. So I need hire freelance editors like constantly, like before
Mm-hmm.
AI age, right? Because my book written before that,
Right.
and that makes it really hard. I don't know if you know that in Chinese language we only have one tense. We only have present tense. We don't have other tenses.
Mm.
We don't have plurals. We only have singular. Our verb doesn't change with the subject. We say like I do, you do, he do. We don't say
No.
he does.
Wow.
Our
Yeah.
preposition is so different in English, so it's so much harder for a first generation immigrant to write in English.
Mm-hmm.
Recently, in the last few years, there's more book written by second generation immigrants, and I say that because their language, they don't have the language challenge because they were either came to Western world at a very young age, like as a child, or they was born and raised here.
Mm-hmm.
But when you like a Chinese language and you write a Chinese historical fiction, I just naturally they don't have as much information, right? Because they can only access to those being translated into English, and that is very limited.
Mm-hmm.
In addition, if you don't know something there, you don't go seek for it, right? For example, if I don't know there's a Paris, I would never ask, "Hey, how do I get to Paris?" So,
right.
then they start. There's a tendency that either their facts are wrong, or the gaps they filled with their modern Western. How do I put it? Like
Presumptions.
presumptions that
Mhm.
is not right. But for first generation, I know Chinese language, so my research, my information is just overwhelmingly rich. But
Mhm.
my English is a challenge.
So yeah, you must feel a little limited. You found Did you go through several rounds of edits? You said with this publisher for the house
With the
filler.
publisher once, but before that, I have more than one rounds with freelance editors. So I hired 2 rounds of copy editors. I hired 2 rounds of structure editors.
Mhm.
I hired 2 rounds of manuscript evaluators.
Mhm.
My critique group was there along the way, and I had hired beta readers. That's just so much work and so much investment into this
Right.
book.
Well, the
And
reason I ask though is because if you found one that you trust on this front, the one we're talking about, not to fill in the gaps with a Western sensibility or a Western worldview, to not fill in the gaps, did you find somebody that you clicked with or that you trust? Meaning an editor.
well, they helped me with let's say structure of the book, a pace, and what to keep, to take out.
Mm-hmm.
But I have to be always on guard, especially now with AI, because I try use AI to help me with editing of my next book.
Mm-hmm.
And I found if you're not careful, it's just erase your voice. It's erase all
Absolutely, of
culture
course.
relevance and the
Yeah.
cultural references, even though you gave the instruction to the AI
Right.
repeatedly.
Virginia, you're gonna laugh. I'm like, you don't need to tell me. Like, please don't get me started. Don't get me started.
Yeah, I totally relate to this.
No, it's good as a tool. But the reason I asked if you found an editor that you worked well with or trusted is maybe with the second book, you could request that editor. Has it landed with the publisher, or are you still in the process of looking for a publisher?
I'm still in the process. I have already done that, hired editors for my second book. It's all done. Like there's one editor, a freelance editor I really like, but I found everyone have its own limitations. So I need to use different resource and consolidate them, and then follow my heart and my intuition, because I found that
Absolutely. That's the
when
bottom
you
line, truly. I like getting multiple editors. I usually have 2 passes with different editors. And then when you want to dig in your heels and say, nope, that's my voice. That was a choice. You know what I mean? And you get more convicting about your choices when you have thrown it out there for multiple eyes to feed back on.
Well,
yeah,
listen,
but when you when you first started, I think it was really hard for me when two editors give you conflicting advices. Which one do you follow? If you're not sure, you don't know, right?
yeah.
That's really hard. So I have to wait, put the manuscript aside and wait for some time.
On
Then,
that front, yeah, you said it was a gift that you had such a long delay because you were actually able to go and do more research, right, and create more. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but more maybe texture and ambiance and authenticity. You said something about it being a blessing in disguise that you had such a long delay.
not only that, that happened to my first book. Now it's happening to my second book. I'm glad it was not published like last year, because this version is so much better.
No, I used to hate being edited. No, I'm sorry. I used to hate rewrites.
Yeah.
I had this fantasy that, okay, I've got a mature writing voice and I've arrived and it should come right off the pen from God through me off the pen. And why would you mess with it if you were really warmed up and your intuition was firing on all cylinders? That's a fantasy. It can happen for, a little moment here and a little moment there. But I've grown to the point where I love rewrites for that reason. It just gets better and better.
Yeah, exactly. And especially, I found that if you just rely on writing advices and the courses and writing and books on writing, it's not enough. Like my newest revision of my second book came from another book I read. It's all of a sudden like the sky opened, the lights shining down.
Yeah, and we have to, and we always have to grow and evolve too. So as long as we're exposing ourselves to new writers and new approaches, we're supposed to evolve. I did have the thought the other day, though. I'm not an avid reader. I don't have my finger on the pulse of the different trends from the different imprints at the moment. But I think I know good literature, and it could be partially due to AI. But I think voice is a thing of the past. I deal with young editors who want to squelch my voice at every turn. I guess style. I mean, it's not the narrative voice, but the style. So everything's generic and homogenous and cookie cutter, in my opinion. You go back and read. Well, it is. And I blame it. Nobody reads anymore. But I'm just, I'm thinking back to some of the classics I mentioned earlier. And I'm sorry, it's not style over substance, right? A lot of our writers that come on this show talk about style as separate from the story. Or do you remember that, Virginia? I'm not going to name names, but one person said, "Oh, the writing's great, the story sucked." Or the story was great, the writing sucked. Isn't it one animal? They should go hand in hand. And I don't know, I just think everything is generic, and all the advice you get from editors nowadays are to, I don't know, accommodate to some kind of style guide, but they have no clue about voice. And I'm talking about the young ones. Sorry.
That's really sad. So in another, we know that in these publishing houses, their interns look after those slash pals, right?
Oh, no.
That's always a concern for me.
Oh, no. Well, it's kind of like with screenwriting, you have to get past the reader to get the attention of a studio. And the reader's usually a college intern.
Yeah. So, but I almost kind of welcome AI in a way if they hire AI to read your entire manuscript rather than an intern read the first few pages. Maybe AI is a better choice.
Because AI has read a book or two, maybe.
Exactly. And AI has a patience, right? AI won't run out of patience. AI could read your entire book in like a really short time, right?
Right.
Minutes, maybe.
What I'll think about AI too, but when you made that comment is, especially when you're talking about interns and the readers and, it's an intern doing it. So when I first got into writing, oh my gosh, almost 20 years ago, I used to do a lot of the slush pile reads when I was getting my editor hat, training. And I noticed when I would read something, a few things. It depended on the time of day I was reading somebody's manuscript, if I was more judgy or not. If I had more responsibilities because I was a young mom at the time, if I had my littles with me and it was like one of those crazy days where they're like only half day in preschool or kindergarten or something, that also affected my attitude toward what I was reading. So I realized a lot of like the existential like of my world would impact when I'd sit down and read somebody's.
Of course.
And that's horrible because there could be something really good, but you get like you get 2 paragraphs in, you're like, yeah, this is just crap, and you just throw it because you're just not in the mood.
Right. I often read something that somebody, people send me things and either it grabs you or it doesn't. But sometimes I think it's bad because if I have to read a paragraph 5 times to literally follow the train of thought, that's a problem.
Yeah.
But then sometimes I go, on a different day with more coffee, maybe I would have followed it. Yeah, there's so many variables. Sorry, go ahead, Tong.
Yeah, I'm a avid reader, but I'm not very patient. So usually I read a book or listen to a book for the opening chapters. If I don't like it, I just give up.
Life's too short. Yeah, we can't be reading crap. Sorry.
Having said that, I learned my lessons with 2 books. One is the Lord of Flies, and another one is Of Mouse and Man.
Of course. So you didn't take to them initially.
That's right.
But then you.
Yeah.
Tell me more.
I love those 2 books so much.
Oh, they're awesome. Yes.
Yeah. It's just beginning to me was too slow. I didn't know where it goes, so I gave up. And then later I learned like how important basically those books are. So I especially I watched a play of Mouse and Man. I said, gee, I need to reread that book. And the second time I read those 2 books, I absolutely fell in love with them.
Yeah.
Isn't that amazing? I use a film example, Virginia. Sorry, I've probably said it on this podcast, but I had that experience with a film. I resisted it. I was ready to walk out. And I don't generally walk out of films. I get my money's worth. But I was ready to walk out. And it was mainly, I had a kind of negative reaction to, it just seemed, again, very style conscious, style over substance. And that, I need something to engage me. I need the character arc to invest in, something developing under the surface. And it was so seemingly superficial and stylistic. I thought, no, I need more. I'm almost out of here. But I hung in there, like you're saying, I hung in there. And it became probably one of my favorite films of all time. Yeah. But I realized that the director knew exactly what he was doing because the characters were superficial and image conscious. So the style reflected that. And then slowly, despite yourself, you realize, wow, I really am developing affinity for them, despite them being seemingly unredeemable or whatever. The things you invest in just through your humanity.
Yeah.
You don't know why you're caring about these characters because they seem unredeemable or despicable.
Yeah.
Those are the films I love now. That your humanity alone is what makes you invest in these characters.
Okay, so I want to share a story now that you just shared that, Dominic. This is with music. I will not say who the artist is, though, because I'm going to save myself from that humiliation. However, I am not a fan of this artist, but I have a professor who is doing empathy through this specific artist music. And so I was like, you know what? Okay, I know she's only focusing on this one artist and empathy through their music, but I want to just kind of see, because I do believe in music therapy and that music can move you. So I'm like, I don't really like this artist, so I want to see how this applies. And
you really shouldn't talk about Taylor Swift this way, Virginia.
That is actually who this is.
Oh my God. See how intuitive I am?
I know you are. All right. So I have a professor who's a total Swiftie. So anyway, I spent 48 hours listening to all of Taylor Swift's top songs. And not that I hit all of them. There's some that I can stomach. And like Shake It Off, for example, like I think of my little girls dancing around to that song when it came out. So I do have some fond memories with some songs. And so and you do tie emotional attachment to songs. I kid you guys not, and this was last week, by the way, that I went to this, and there's a few more after this week that I just went to. But anyways, it was my first week going. We had to pick a song, and it had to be one that gave us big feels. And I found a song that gave me big feels and shared it. But after listening to everybody else and why they picked the song they did, I was a crying mess by the end of the frickin' seminar.
Oh.
And I'm not, like, again, I'm not a Swiftie. I'm not going to like go listening to her on the radio just because I want to. But
when I was at Art Center, and this was way back, actually we went to school at the same time, Tong. You were in the master's program, but from 89 to 91, Art Center, one of the top design schools in the world, by the way, Art Center College of Design. It's very well respected. And
where?
Oh, it's in Pasadena, California. But it's
wow.
Yeah, it's one of the most expensive private schools in this country, but it's it's got like Ford Motor Company endowments, and it's just traditionally one of the top design schools. But anyway, even there, that real elitist academic climate, you had a class called The Films of Keanu Reeves. Not kidding. And then there was one called Eye on Manhattan, and it was films set in Manhattan. But it included Desperately Seeking Susan with Madonna, if that makes sense. But I do think, Madonna is a phenomenon. There are many classes about the cultural icon that is Madonna. That warrants. So I kind of get it. Taylor Swift, you got to examine why she's having such an impact, even if you don't respect it.
Well, and that was the thing. Like, I walked away from that and actually having more appreciation for her. And understanding, like, knowing how old she was when she wrote certain songs, and looking at it more through a therapeutic lens, because obviously that's what the class was, because we're talking about advanced empathy, what the professor was teaching counseling, but it's like all what we talked about. Like, I walked away, if I had to sign up for this class willingly, I wouldn't have had the appreciation to go like, oh my gosh, she was only like 19 years old. She was only 22 years old. I mean, she's talking about things that at my age, going on 50, that when I think back to myself at that age, I probably wouldn't have even been on my radar. And so when you see it, so that's what's so amazing when we take the time, which is what I love about, Tong Ge, what you've said is, when we take the time to just maybe look at through a different lens and not, let the fact that, like we said, I didn't have my morning cup of coffee and here I am reading this and I'm going, whatever, we miss sometimes.
You got to give it your full attention.
Yeah.
I've had people tell me they speed up this podcast.
Oh.
Do you know what I mean? Like, and you can, in all of these apps, you can speed them up to 2. And I'm like, number one, I don't want to sound like Mickey Mouse. But I hate when people say they speed read. Yeah. No. Don't read my novel at all if you're going to speed read it. Yeah. Am I wrong?
I never liked the Bridget. It's called the Bridget novel, right?
Yes, the abridged version.
Abridged version. I never liked that. It's like, I feel they took out all the flash and then now you have a skeleton left.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, I also don't agree with the academic take on most literature. I'm not talking about, they just don't get into the thematic content. They talk about the form. And then in a very superficial way, they water down what's actually being said, the thematic content. My take is always way more nuanced. And I'm not inside the head of the author. I'm only speculating what their intention was. But do you know what I mean? They always miss the mark.
Yeah.
Literary critics always miss the mark and play it safe.
Hey, I heard there's a line I really liked from, I read it many years ago. They said literary critics are those who goes to the battlefield and finish all those injured soldiers.
It's true. And literary criticism evolved out of liturgy, by the way, right? Nobody was analyzing literature before the church came along. So anyway, it's problematic. The beauty is we can all have our own opinions. This morning, my niece and I were texting back and forth about the biopic about Dylan. I guess it's A Complete Unknown. Have you guys seen that?
No.
It's the Bob Dylan biopic.
I haven't.
Anyway, I just watched it last night on Hulu. Okay. Bob Dylan. Anyway, and she was saying, like, la, 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 la. I don't want to know too much. I don't like to go into movies with preconceived notions. And I actually said, I'm exactly the same way. But the beauty is nobody else's opinion really has much sway on me. So thank God for that. Including the critics. I can still go in. Hopefully they haven't issued any spoilers, but I can still go in and I'm going to have my own experience no matter what. There are certain actors that just the fact that they've chosen to do a certain project, that's enough for me. I'd watch them make out a shopping list,
I was gonna say when a critic actually makes a comment, it inspires me more to actually go watch or read something because I'm like, okay, that was your lens at whatever moment in time. And so now it's like, so how well does that up to my lens? Or which is me telling my existentialism here, but on a grander, existential viewpoint, how does it add up? So it actually makes me a little bit more like, I want to prove you wrong. And sometimes I walk in going, yeah, they were correct. And then sometimes I walk in going, well, there's about 5 other ways I can see that.
Yep. Well, actually, to tie it back to something you said a moment ago, Tong Ge, I think that you mentioned you had one editor say, ooh, you're going to piss a lot of people off with this, right? Or that's dangerous territory.
She was a manuscript evaluator.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Well, that just reminds me a little bit of the pleasure principle. A lot of people, not critics, not necessarily people educated in this field, but a lot of people will dislike a movie because it made them uncomfortable. We've talked about that. Yeah. Oh, it's bad because I felt A, B, C, and D. And it's like, actually, if they provoked you or intrigued you and that movie haunted you, they did their job.
Yeah, that's right.
Anyway. All right. Well, we should probably bring it to a close. I hope you didn't mind the chit chat. We tend to do that on this podcast. Sorry.
Not at all. It's lovely.
Well, maybe we'll have you back on for book 2. Do you have any kind of release date in mind?
No, I don't. I'm still in a final stage of editing. Yeah.
Well, enjoy. And we'll have you back on whether you have something to promote or not. This was a pleasure. Yeah. Is there anything you'd like to share with the listeners that that you're really inspired to impart?
I just like to have a small request. Listeners, if you like my book, really appreciate write a review on Amazon because that's so important to the authors and that keeps us going.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And, okay, your links will be in the episode description.
Yeah.
Yeah, please leave reviews. That is everything, isn't it?
It is. Yes.
Thank you. Thank you both. Really
You're welcome. It was great having you on.
Yeah, thank you so much. This was awesome. And we'll reach out for part 2 if you're ever interested.
For sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. To our listeners, remember, life is story. And we can get our hands in the clay. Individually and collectively, we can write a new story. See you next time.
We want to take a moment to thank our wonderful listeners and supporters. Your continued support and sharing of our podcast helps us spread the transformative power of storytelling. If you enjoy our episodes, please rate and review us on your favorite platform and share the podcast with friends and family. For more enriching conversations and insights, subscribe to Language of the Soul podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, iHeartRadio, and anywhere you listen to podcasts. Follow us on social media and visit our Patreon website for the latest updates and exclusive content. Your support helps us continue to bring these important stories to life. If you'd like to support us further, consider joining our Patreon community for exclusive content and donation options. Every bit of support helps us reach more hearts and minds.